just to set us up again for our continuing study of the Heart Sutra. It's been almost a month, and last week we had a wonderful celebration of the Dalai Lama's birthday. So I don't know if Annie is here, but someone will put Carol Bailey's email in the chat room, and she asked to make a resource for us. So if you would send her the book and the pages of the reading that you did, and if you did do a memory, if you're able to write that out, it was such a special sharing that she thought we might want to remember it. So starting there, when we were doing the readings from the Dalai Lama, his emphasis from the earliest time I went to hear him is that peace begins with him, within, not with him, within. One of the first times I saw him in person, and you can tell how long ago that was, he was saying, if you want world disarmament, first you have to disarm your own heart. So that was quite a long time ago that we were looking at the issue of disarmament. And he's said that in many, many different ways. But one of the poems that was read is a really famous poem called Never Give Up. And in that poem, he says, work for peace in your heart, and in the world, work for peace. So just being very clear that the two are interconnected. There is not going to be peace in the world without peace in our own hearts. And that the first step is this inner peace. We've also been using the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh as a resource, and that was his emphasis as well. We can't go into engaged Buddhism working for peace without peace in our own hearts. It begins with us, and our actions won't communicate what truth we wish to bring into the world if we don't begin with that within. So our actions can go awry, or they will have no meaning without the inner peace. They'll be just a facade. And our method in this moment of exploring outer peace is by looking at the Heart Sutra in depth, because the Heart Sutra teaches the fundamental nature with the experiential wisdom coming throughout the thousands of years of Buddhist teaching, that if we recognize the fundamental nature, then our hearts are at peace, and we are actually fearless in the works that we do. So this fundamental nature is both our inner experience and what we experience as the world, which sometimes we have the habit of looking at as outside. And even in the Heart Sutra, you see, as the Heart Sutra unfolds, that this is not a solitary, isolated peace. It's not us alone on our cushions. The seeing of the fundamental nature of reality is what allows the Bodhisattva path to unfold and creates the fearlessness of the Bodhisattva. The line towards the end, that those who recognize this have no fear. And that's what allows the Bodhisattvas to be in the war realms, in the hell realms, in the whole hungry ghost realms, and be a light of wisdom to guide people, not only people, to guide beings in those different realms. So I think as we've been studying, we also see that this profound prayer, when we look at it in depth, it's not an easy exploration. And this is because we have habits of mind for lifetimes or even within this lifetime of really thinking very simply, thinking in a hurried, unquestioned way, and then forming assumptions and opinions based on the perceptions that we have that are not really considered in any kind of depth. But those habits are so strong, and we live in a world that is so rushed that it's hard to break those patterns of thinking and hard to change those reactive patterns. We can, easily see that in just our sense of, where we're sitting in the rooms that we're sitting. I'm thinking that I'm sitting in my chair, looking at my water glass. Actually, as a nun, I can't say I'm in my space, it's Liberation House, and I can't say I own the objects, but there are a few objects, like let's say my mala. It's my mala and I own this mala. So we have this sense of making impermanent objects permanent and seeing a existing self that owns that permanent object. And that's what gets us into trouble over and over again. That's what gets nations into trouble, communities into trouble. And so the Heart Sutra is a pointing out of a gradual unveiling. It'd be wonderful if it was like a window pane that we could just shatter and then we could see reality as it is. But it's more a subtle unveiling as we ask questions. One of the quotes that I was contemplating this morning as I was preparing is a famous Zen quote. At first, the mountains are mountains, then the mountains are not mountains, then the mountains are mountains again. So this describes the complexity of the unraveling of our habitual patterns. So I might look out the window. If I were back in Vermont, I would see a mountain and I would say, that's Mount A, that's the mountain outside of my house, that's a Vermont mountain. Or in Maine, it would be Mount Katahdin. I think of Mount Katahdin as a Maine mountain. So at first, mountains are mountains. They're these giant structures, casting a shadow, things that you climb. But when we start thinking about the mountains complexly, we see, wow, it's a geological function that is millennia old, that was a movement of the earth. And in fact, mountains are still moving. They're not stationary objects. Scientists can tell you the exact amount a mountain moves every year, but it is measurable. And it's made up of lots of different kinds of things, like rock structures, earth structures, trees. It's a home for all kinds of birds and animals. And it's not one thing. All of these parts and time come together to make the mountain. And then if we look at the history, at this moment, we can say the mountain is in a place that is described as Maine, but how long has Maine been Maine? When was Maine a part of Canada? When was Maine a great continent and a tribal land without boundary, a familial tribal land place? When was it before there were even human occupants to give it a name? So we see the ludicrousness of all of these conceptual and physical parts that are operating that make this form that we call a mountain. And then we look at the geological function that began the process, and now we're looking at a climate process that's changing the mountain again. So we can start to look at that in any object and in our own bodies. If I were to think of my body today and say, this is the change I woke up to this morning. This is the way I experienced my body yesterday. It's not the same as it was last week. It's not the same as it was a decade ago. So this body that I sometimes think of as myself when I'm not really thinking complexly is also a coming together of many different kinds of relationships. So we bring that unfolding awareness through the Heart Sutra, and now we're at the stanza, listen, Shariputra, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. Their true nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, no defilement, no purity, no increasing, no decreasing. So this and the following stanza are an expansion of form is emptiness, emptiness is form stanza that was just before it. And it begins with, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. And so the key point is the word all. All phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. The mountain, these bodies we occupy, our minds, our experiences, anything we can think of bears the mark of emptiness, interconnection, interbeing, interdependence. Even emptiness bears the mark of emptiness. Buddha nature bears the mark of emptiness. Dharmakaya, the ultimate wisdom. It's not just the phenomena we see around us, it is all phenomena. So as we look at this stanza, we can say, well, this first line, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness, actually can refer to the 4 seals of the Dharma. And this also can function like a little bit of a review for us. So the 4 seals of the Dharma are, first, all phenomena are impermanent by nature. Then all contaminated phenomena are the sources of discontentment. All phenomena are devoid of inherent permanent existence or self. Cessation or nirvana is utter peace. So let's go back. First of all, I think we're getting fairly familiar with impermanence. We've discussed that a lot. So let's say that's, at least we've dipped our toe into that. Then how is it we then say all contaminated phenomena are the sources of discontentment? So again, language is an issue. Contaminated is a funny kind of word. We just don't have a word in English to express if there were a single unitary phenomena that was not made of parts, that would be one thing. And we're contrasting that with the fundamental nature, which is everything is interdependent and impermanent. Interdependent and made of parts and has characteristics. So in the definition of that, they have the pure phenomena and contaminated phenomena, but you can also use the word phenomena with characteristics. It's just a let go of the vocabulary issue. But how are these phenomena that we experience the sources of discontentment? And that we can look at in terms of the two topics I brought up, aging and borders. If we look at borders, how we create borders, we're seeing something that is built upon thinking in a way that doesn't hold with the fundamental nature. The fundamental nature is that borders are ludicrous. You know, the borders are shifting every moment in time. There was just an article in the New York Times this morning of the new territories in the Middle East and how they've rearranged the borders. You know, how China rearranged the border of its country by claiming Tibet. So it's built on this unquestioned thought that there can be a selfhood in a nature that can define a line and create ownership. Similarly, with aging, if we think of our own direct experience, aging is a process in a natural process in our mind and body that we resist. If we recognize the fundamental nature of bodies, the fundamental nature of how the brain in our body can shift and change with age. If we resist this, we resist illness, we resist day-to-day changes, then we can see it's the resisting of the fundamental nature of the phenomena that causes discontent. So we're not saying that the body's not wonderful. It's the resistance to the fundamental nature that causes discontent. And all phenomena that has parts that are interdependent, or all phenomena, when their fundamental nature is not seen, discontent arises. And we're going to come back to that. Then the third one, all phenomena are devoid of inherent or single isolated permanent existence or self. This self that we assume is this complex relationship of all of these causes and conditions that coalesce that we name a self, even though there is no such self there. So I know I recommended to everyone that they listen to Khenchen Rinpoche's Samsara and Nirvana, Two Sides of the Same Hand. It was a 2-day lecture series that he gave. And I was reminded of a Milarepa story that he was telling. And these teaching stories essentially shift in terms of why you're telling it and how you're telling it. So I'll combine his favorite part and my favorite part. So Milarepa, the great Tibetan saint, has had an incredible life that started out with extreme poverty and then very destructive acts in which he was the cause of many deaths. And then he went to a teacher and had very, very harsh training. The teacher could see his karma and could see what was necessary. And then when he was ready, he went off on his own to meditate, and he's famous for meditating all over Tibet in all of these caves and letting go essentially of everything. So finally he had one zen, like one rag to cover himself with, and one clay pot to cook either nettle soup, which was the closest natural herb growing in that area, or probably then he was even without tea. So he was drinking nettle tea and eating nettle soup. So he'd let go of any comfort, the way that we think of comfort in terms of food and warm blankets and relatives, loved ones, all these different things that we're attached to. He was down to just one bowl and one rag. It's about as austere as you can get. And he was joyfully meditating. And every time he was close to a village and people started gathering and start to offer physical comforts again, he could see attachment building, then he'd move to a new cave. So he was on his way to a new cave, and he stumbled and he dropped his clay pot, and desperately trying to catch his pot, the wind blew away his zen. So you can imagine that moment. And that moment was an incredible realization of impermanence. And in that moment, he let go of many of his veils that were remaining. This unfolding is natural and slow. So the last veils were loosening and becoming transparent. So he goes back to the cave he had found, and all of a sudden there are all of these, and they call them asuras, but mischief makers in the cave. He was going, how am I going to meditate in here? What can I do with, these mischief makers? All right, I'll teach them the Dharma, then they'll settle down and maybe we can just meditate together. So he starts to teach the Dharma to them, and they just burst out laughing and saying, who do you think you are? Just cut it out. And so it was clear there were still a few more veils to be shed. So he goes outside and he meditates some more, and he goes, oh, okay. Goes back in the cave, and you're welcome. Let's share this cave together. Go ahead, have your fun. I'm no longer disturbed by, sources of annoyance. Please make yourself at home. So then most of the asuras evaporated, and there was one left, and it was the most fearsome one. And if you've studied with me a while, this is the part of the story I like the best, because it's that final koan. He looks at this fearsome goddess, he meditates some more, and then he puts his head into the mouth of the goddess. And then the goddess transforms, the monster transforms into a goddess who becomes his ardent student and protector. But it's that recognition of the fundamental nature that is a lived recognition, that a recognition that is no longer just intellectual, that disperses all the fear. And that recognition is a recognition of these components. All phenomena are impermanent. There is not a dynamic of me and mine that when we look at it, we can uphold. And when we see that, our mind sheds a great deal of the suffering that arises from trying to hold on to me and mine. And that in this shedding process, when we really understand not a separate self, rather an interconnection with all of life, not more important or less important, rather this dynamic of relationships, the self that we're carrying just becomes clear that it's a created assumption, and the sameness of all of life and the interconnection of all of life is like water going into water. So then he can put his head into the mouth of the monster. And then that follows, that realization is a realization of peace and equanimity, complete interconnectedness and fearlessness. So I'd like to invite you to take a minute to just observe something in your environment, but something that you cling to as mine. And just take a moment to look deeply at that object, seeing its impermanence, its interconnection with a timeline. It arose from causes and conditions. It continues with causes and conditions. And allowing your sense of mind to soften, seeing it for truly what it is, as opposed to something that can be owned. Let's just take a few minutes on our own, contemplating that. Can be a simple thing like a chair or a cup. How did it arise as a chair? What are all the relationships that come together in this thing that you call a name specifically? How is that particular phenomena conditioned by the four seals? How is it impermanent? How is it a source of discontent? How is it empty of a single unchanging selfness? And how might this inquiry create peace? So I invite you to continue this practice as you move through your day or through your week. And just from time to time, especially when you gravitate towards your favorite things, whatever that might be, do a quick recollection of the 4 seals. How is it impermanent? How does it cause discontent? How is it free from a separate, unchanging self? And how does this letting go make space for peace? So we'll say a quick dedication and let go of the live stream so that we can have a little discussion. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.